New video. Today we're doing 2 college football player props here on PrizePicks for Saturday, October 5th. Before we get started, you guys, link in the description below of this video. Hop into the premium Discord, $9.30 per month, 31 cents per day. This is where I post all the plays I'm making on PrizePicks. Super positive community in there, you guys. Everyone in the Discord is trying to help each other cash. I also want to mention I'm not a gambling expert. This is not financial advice. This is simply just the plays I'm personally looking at making. Hopefully give you guys some insight and analysis to make your own player prop decisions here. Again, no one's pressing submit on those parlays other than yourselves. But let's get right into it, you guys. 2 college football player props here. Saturday, October 5th, college football slate. You know how we do this. I love college football fantasy scores for quarterbacks, overs. Again, we went 2-0 last Saturday, college football. We went 2-0 yesterday, Thursday, or 2 days ago, Thursday night football. Again, looking to continue this run. I think we've had a pretty good, if you go back and look at like the last 6 videos, I think I've hit on like 5 of the last 6. So maybe 4 of the last 5. It's either 4 of the last 5 or 5 of the last 6. Nonetheless, on a nice little run here. Again, links in the description below, premium Discord. I also want to talk about Daily Grind Fantasy. Again, DFS Optimizer is a tool that I do use on a regular basis, you guys. There's a link in the description below. You're using promo code TUFF. You can get 25% off your first month using Daily Grind Fantasy. Again, absolute elite DFS Optimizer tool. They do all the hard work for you. You can see here the top play on the board right now is a CS2 esports player prop here, but Dak Prescott under 16.5 fantasy has a 54.82% odds to hit. Because DraftKings does not have fantasy scores, right? Daily Grind takes what DraftKings, passing yards, passing attempts, passing touchdowns, those stats, they combine them into what DraftKings fantasy score line would be. Over on DraftKings, it's at 14.6. PrizePicks has Dak Prescott's fantasy score line at 16.5, giving this a 54.82% odds to hit, showing this type of line discrepancy. So again, you guys, link in the description below, promo code TUFF, 25% off your first month. But let's get into these 2 player props. Let's not waste any time. Let's go. So the first play I'm looking at here is going to be Garrett Green, quarterback, West Virginia. I think it's over 26.5 fantasy score. And actually, both these plays are going to be players that I've taken on the channel before. But we look at this matchup. Easily one of the highest over-unders on the entire night, or of the entire slate of college football. 64.5 over-under. Oklahoma State versus West Virginia just should be absolute shootout here. In my opinion, I mean, we're looking at Texas Tech, Arizona down here at 64.5, but that's a 6.5 point spread here. 3-point spread, you guys. 3-point spread. Oklahoma State versus West Virginia. Like I said, massive over 60, massive game total, 64.5. This actually opened at 65.5. But we look at Garrett Green, right? Dual threat quarterback, obviously can rack up the fantasy points pretty easily. Let's just go back to this season. Let's just look at this season alone. 5.9 against probably one of the better secondaries and overall pass defenses in the country in Penn State. 34.2 against Albany in minimal work, right? Only threw the ball 23 times. 19.3 versus Pitt on the road. And then last week, just played elite, or I guess essentially this would be the last time he played. I think they had a bye. I think this is, anyways, we took this line 32.5 for Garrett Green. I know we took this line in the Discord, and he threw 2 picks in that game. So again, made some mistakes, still able to finish with 32.5 fantasy points. We kind of look at Oklahoma State, right? Oklahoma State this season, we look at in the Big 12, right? How they kind of match up to quarterbacks, and quarterbacks just haven't been able to dominate Oklahoma State. They're allowing the second most points per game, fantasy points per game, to the quarterback position at 26.7 fantasy points per game. You can see our Oklahoma State giving up, again, the second most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. And we look at quarterbacks, right, versus Oklahoma State. I would say Avery Johnson, the quarterback for K-State, is one of the best comparisons physically in his skill set to Garrett Green. And he just went off for 39.4 fantasy versus OK State. 259 yards to the air, 3 passing touchdowns. Also had 60 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. So very similar profile and type of player, build, whatever you want to call it, to Garrett Green, and he just had 39.4. We saw Isaac Wilson, who's a backup for Utah, put up 14.4, but the key here, he has 41 rushing yards against OK State. And then we also saw, who is this, Taylor Green, obviously a dual threat quarterback as well. He put up 28.7 fantasy points against OK State. He threw 416 passing yards in that matchup. So again, it's an elite matchup. We also do look at this Mark Gronowski. He put up 19.3, right? For South Dakota State quarterback, he put up 19.3 fantasy against Oklahoma State on the road. So given the floor of this line, I think at bare minimum, like absolute floor for Garrett Green here is like 22, 23 fantasy, which gives us elite upside here, in my opinion, for him to clear this line, just given how poor and weak this Oklahoma State defense is. Again, you look at over on Outlier. Again, there's also a link in the description. Get a 7-day free trial. Passing yards allowed and rushing yards allowed. Look at where Oklahoma State ranks across the country. 121st and 118th in the country. Again, there's only like 130 something or 140 something college football teams in the Division I level. So this kind of gives you an idea of the poor defense that Oklahoma State does have. And then we look at his rushing attempts. Over 13.5 is currently minus 135 over on Bet365. And if we look at Garrett Green, like in his career, like for example, this season, only game with at least 17 rushing attempts, 32.5 fantasy against KU. But let's just say let's just give him 12 rushing attempts, right? Minus 135 over 13.5. Let's just say 12, right? In his career, last season with 12 rushing attempts, 42.3 fantasy, 25.57 fantasy, 44.1 fantasy, 19.6 against Penn State. And then last season versus OK State, you guys, in the same matchup, 31.7 fantasy points, 16 carries, 117 yards. Did not even score a rushing touchdown, which we know he has that rushing touchdown upside, and just absolutely dominated. And look at last season. You know, he went over this line in some pretty decent games, and this is really his first full season starting. Even if you go back to 2022, when he kind of first started getting his reps, he had some massive games there as well. 36.4 fantasy against Oklahoma. Just a strong spot for Garrett Green here. Again, massive game total. 3-point spread. I like this spot a lot here for Garrett Green. Second play here is going to be another prop. I think we took this last week. We did actually take this last week. It's going to be KJ Jefferson over 22.5 fantasy. Again, taking a look at this game total and this spread, 61.5, the highest game total of any game this week of teams playing in the SEC. And again, anything over 60, in my opinion, massive shootout potential. And this is a 1.5-point spread. The UCF's actually going to be 1.5-point favorites going on the road to Gainesville to play Florida, right? 61.5-point game total. Vegas obviously projecting a ton of scoring in this one, but KJ Jefferson now here over this line in 3 or 4 games to start the season, coming off of 30 fantasy points per game matchup versus Colorado. Going back to 2022, right? We know the type of player KJ Jefferson is. I talked about it in last week's video. Fantasy upside is extremely, extremely high for a player like KJ Jefferson. Even if we look at last season on Arkansas, when he didn't have a great team around him, he had his best game of the year at Florida. This is the same matchup at Florida. 32.4 fantasy points last year at Florida. 255 yards to the air, 2 passing touchdowns, 92 yards rushing, and a rushing touchdown. And he had 2 fumbles. Or I guess not fumbles lost, sorry. 2, fumbles, but not lost. But nonetheless, best game of the season last year at Florida. He gets the same matchup at Florida here with much better talent around him. Just much, much better, right? RJ Harvey, Kobe Hudson. And then Florida giving up the second most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, 22.4 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, right? And we kind of look, like I said, KJ Jefferson is a dual threat type of running quarterback. Blake Shapen split time last week with Michael Van Buren Jr. Blake Shapen got hurt. Before Blake Shapen got hurt, he got hurt in like the 3rd quarter, I believe. I mean, he was well on his way to clearing this line. He finished with 17.8 fantasy points versus Florida. And again, he's not a rushing quarterback. He finished with 12 carries, 32 yards rushing, and a rushing touchdown, also 3 for 140 and a passing touchdown. Again, he got hurt, played in the 3rd quarter. We look at another quarterback very similar to KJ Jefferson is Cam Ward. He put up 32.7. I would say Cam Ward is much better than KJ Jefferson, but still 32.7 he put up. And then also something that's interesting is Marcel Reed, who, again, was a backup quarterback to start the season. He put up 29.4 fantasy points against Florida, you guys. A very similar dual threat type of quarterback. He had 83 yards rushing and a rushing touchdown, along with 178 yards to the air and 2 passing touchdowns, finishing with 29.4 fantasy against Florida. I think it's a great spot. 1.5-point spread, massive game total as well. Both these player props here, just toting massive game total. 61.5 here for KJ Jefferson. And like I said, 64.5 here for Garrett Green. So it's a great spot. Again, KJ Jefferson, we look at kind of the matchup that he does have against Florida. They rank 97th in the country in passing yards and 110 against in rushing yards to opponents. So great spot for both these players. Again, check out Daily Grind Fantasy DFS Optimizer. Link in the description, promo code TUFF, 25% off your first month. 2 player props for today's college football Saturday, October 5th video. Please drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and as always, let's cash.